You're listening to the Slavic Literature Pod, your shelf help guide to all things Slavic. I'm Cameron Lalana.
And I'm Matt Gerasimovich.
And today we're covering Part 1, Chapter 33 of Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate, this time moving on from the staff of the hospital and then the conscript battalion back to just Ludmila as she spent some time alone with her son. And I would say her son's grave, but perhaps in this particular case, with her son is a more apt description. Is there anywhere in particular that you'd like to talk about this chapter? It was a hard one to read.
Yeah, this is another quintessential Call Your Mother chapter, I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
There was something that I had not noticed on my second or third read through of it, but that I just noticed picking up my book right now to do this. And there is, again, this line on page 152 of the Robert Chandler translation, where as Ludmila is kneeling down very gently, again, it is so as not to disturb her son. And I find it just so interesting how cautious Grossman's characters are around the dead. I, again, can't make a grand statement on what it is, but I just find it something so fascinating in his writing, the attentiveness to the dead. And in this case, it is sort of because Ludmila is in this sort of delirious in-between stage where Yulia is both, kind of alive, and she's trying to reconcile with the fact that he's died and can't quite come to grips with it. So that part of it was a tough read, but good on me for noticing a small detail that is probably not that important.
Right. It is an interesting trend to notice, though. And, well, if nothing else, in his treatment of the dead, and perhaps depending on how we're going forward and noticing this particular line, when that might not be applied.
Yeah, it's kind of the rule for literary studies. If you see something like twice, it's probably good enough for a grad school paper or a grad school presentation. 3 times, oh baby, you can publish that.
That's your dissertation right there.
That's a dissertation right there.
That's so if you're any of you in grad school who need that rule of thumb, 2 times, that's good for a term paper. 3 times, you can take that one all the way to the bank. The bank being what do you call it? Defense committee? The committee you're defending
maybe.
it to?
Yeah. Well, they don't pay you, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah, what did you like on this chapter?
Just the way we've been talking about Ludmila's grief a lot so far, but that's mostly expressed itself in terms of how the world changes around Ludmila. So we have it by implication, really. There are moments, right? Of course, she expresses some thoughts. She connects with some people. We can see the form it takes. And we have it's like looking at someone else grieving something. Like if you've ever lived with someone who's grieving someone, it's very similar to that, with the additional context of, being able to see the world more around here. But here we actually get to see, her internal state and the revelation that, as Grossman says, everyone, if they had been really thinking about Ludmila, they might have been surprised by her calm, but that's because she's been, so to speak, mad this whole time. She has not accepted her son is dead, and still has not really, even here. And I think just this whole internal life about Tolia, but also about herself. I think this is a really interesting chapter for saying how she sees herself as well, right? Because we have so many characters who interpret her as gosh. I tried not to apply Grossman's own life to his writing too much, but I think this case it kind of does apply. According to, I think it's an Alexandra Popov's book, Grossman, his nickname for his wife, a little unkindly, was the Stone Baba, the stone babushka, stone grandmother, because of how he kind of saw her being unsympathetic to him. And I think that's very true for Ludmila's characterization, where everyone is a little bit like, yeah, that's Ludmila. She's a little or very high strung, right? And she acknowledges that in previous chapters. And here, in the moment when she's kneeling at her son's grave, and she thinks, and I think this is right after she's kind of like made her first step towards understanding that Tolia is dead. And she thinks that, no one had ever loved him. And my poor boy, my poor timid, clumsy little son, No one really loved him. He was weird to everyone else, but I loved him. But in the same way that no one loved him, quote, no one had ever loved her either. The people close to her saw only her failings. He, Talia, was the only person who loved her, and now he was alone with her in the cemetery at night. He would never leave her. He would still love her when she was a he would still love her when she was a useless old woman who got in everyone's way. Um, the ways in which grief is also deeply personal, I think Grossman portrays it so well here that it's not just simply I've lost him, but also here's what that loss means to me. We have someone who feels so fundamentally alienated from someone and everyone in her life, except for her son, the one person even when she's old and useless, and people will stop valuing her because now she's young enough to still be useful. He will still love her then, and now he's gone. And what is there left? And this is just such an excellent piece of characterization. It's so heartbreaking to read, not just this vague idea of what it is, but this complete destruction of the self. What a person can mean to you. I think it is just pulled together so well in such a horrible way.
Yeah, it really, this part of the book reminded me of a few chapters ago, and not that it was necessarily any good per se, and we were kind of making fun of him a little bit as a character, but Shagorodsky, he wrote this poem, and it had this sort of I don't know, this line about the plane, the infinite, and this sort of contrast between them, which even though I think it was sort of sort of out of place in the way that he was doing it, it does get to something that is big and important in the novel, which is how these sort of, I don't want to say like big feelings, but these unimaginable, unencompassable feelings are thrust against just the smallest minutia of everyday life. And that's what the book does so well. And so that's one of the things that I liked about this chapter. And not just this chapter, but the way that this chapter is then kind of contrasted to these other ones. Kind of
Yeah,
always got that in the back of your mind.
definitely. And speaking of talking about this chapter in relation to the other ones, I also want to go over to a reader comment here from Leah, a Discord user, who says, I feel this chapter has maximum effect after the three preceding chapters, which focus a lot on the bureaucratic nature of death, the ways people engage with that structure, but also how often they can't fully engage because inconvenient humanity pokes its head out sometimes. Here we are immersed in Ludmilla's grief. It is entirely a human thing in a place set apart. It's almost cinematic. Like I could very clearly see her hunched over that grave, completely wrapped up in her memories of Tolia. Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. I think cinematic encompasses it well. Grossman's writing runs the gamut, and this is one where we're getting the maximum scene setting. Absolutely. And this full place for her to just be herself and absent the other humans who she has to adapt around.
And the one spot I think I know exactly what this user means here. The what it means for it to be cinematic in this case, where this line that I had mentioned before shows kind of the how a lot of the action of the chapter sort of will go, which is these sort of thoughts connected by movement, which is also it happens a lot in Tolstoy as well when you're looking at Anna Karenina, for instance. There's a lot of instances of this, but so she's kneeling down over the grave so as not to disturb her son, straightened the board with his name on it. He had always got angry with her when she straightened the collar of his jacket on their way to school. And so it's this movement that is the kind of connective tissue between those two thoughts for her. And so her mind is completely elsewhere, but it is the movement in the sort of physical reality that is what kind of tethers her to all of that. And that to me, at least, is what made it feel sort of, as Leah said, cinematic. That was kind of that line really got me. That was a really profound way to transition to that, I thought. It wasn't just, oh, and she remembered these wonderful, times. Um, no, it's not even times that were wonderful. It was the things that sort of a mother does for a child that kind of makes them tick as a kid. But you look back later and think, oh, that was nice.
Mm-hmm.
So great chapter, honestly.
Yeah. and maybe something to look towards. We also, if you read the post today, something to look towards in other elements, the ways that the pre-revolutionary graves are talked about. I think Leah had an interesting answer to that in our Discord. So if you're interested, go ahead and check that out. But yeah, I think for the most part, I think that's a good place to leave it. Just a good, very sad chapter.
Yeah, I don't want to go too long on this one just because we got more to dissect in our end of the month episode as well. I think this will make a good. This is a great chapter for dissection and close reading. There's a lot here.
Yeah,
I could
absolutely.
spend probably an hour on just this chapter.
And we might, depending on what happens when we release that episode.
Honestly.
Well, in that case,
I think we are at a good spot, in which case you will hear from us again soon.
Hey, 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 hey.